to another episode of Gossip Finance. I am your host, Alacias.
And I'm Duncan Sandlin. Welcome, everybody. How's it going, Lace?
So, it's going fabulous. I'm looking forward to the holidays.
Yeah.
A little bit of Christmas, a little bit of my birthday, and
Oh, that's right.
New Year's action.
That's right.
Yep, it's true. It's true. I'm turning old years old. So, Duncan, what are we talking about today?
Well, today on the show, we're going to do a little bit of some news stuff, updates on Trump and Elon Musk and stuff. And then we're going to talk about capitalism and socialism and kind of how that relates to the finance world. But it mostly is going to turn into taxes. So we're not going to get into detailed taxes.
I think taxes are a fun topic. I prepare taxes and I find them interesting. I don't know if anybody else is with me.
We'll get into that in a second.
But we'll find out.
So
all right. Get me with what's been happening in the news, Duncan, because I've been being bad and I've been not watching.
No, I know. It's the holidays. So Elon Musk, lost a lot of his Tesla shares because he's tanking Twitter and he's had to keep that afloat. And then there was some deal where he was in Qatar and he was with the Saudi Arabian royal family, who actually, people don't know this, they own a lot of Twitter. I mean, they own billions in Twitter because, they're so for free speech in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, so he was with them.
That does seem weird.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So he was with them.
We'll breeze past the oddity that is.
Right. So he was with them, and there was some speculation that they were not happy. And so pretty soon after meeting with them, he put a poll on Twitter on whether or not he should remain CEO or step down. And he said, what?
Why? Just why is this a good idea?
Well, and he said he'd step down if he lost the poll, right? So you actually...
I am not basing my career choices on a Twitter poll. I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm not doing that.
Well, see, I gave him more credit. My thought was the Saudis were sitting there going, hey, if you want us to help you invest in this or invest more money in this to help you out, then you need to step down. And so I thought, okay, he's doing this as an excuse to step down, right? It's a justification, right? I was wrong, and you...
I think you're giving him a lot of
I gave him way too much credit. He was completely wrong.
Way too much credit.
Because he lost... Go ahead.
Listen, I've got to give him credit for the areas where he is genius, and I absolutely will. But he does some really interesting things, some really strange things. And I know, Duncan, the way that brain of yours works, you really work real hard to try to find a thread of logic if you think there is one in there. And sometimes, my friend, it is not there.
I know.
Man.
Sometimes it's hard.
Not there.
It's hard for me to believe people are this reckless and stupid. But this was the magic. So he lost that poll by 14%. And now he's sort of denying it and saying, no, it was deep state bots or something ridiculous. So now he's trying to back off the poll. It's just ridiculous. It's like, okay. So we'll see how that goes, if he steps down or not. It doesn't look like he wants to at this point. So the other big billionaire...
Okay, hold on. Is this one of those crazy narcissistic moves where it's clearly everybody loves me, nobody's going to say I should step down, I am the face of the company, yada, yada, yada. I'm connecting the dots that you're the face of the company, just kind of tanking it.
Well, I think that's the problem, and that'll actually end up being kind of a theme today, which is a lot of these guys, I don't know necessarily if they're stupid, but they surround themselves with yes men. So everything is reaffirmation. So if you're in that bubble all the time...
Yes, sir. You're so smart, sir. You're such a genius, sir. You're so talented. You're so charming. Right. Everything you say is so witty. Right?
Yeah, right. Anybody who walks in and says, hey, I think that's a really bad idea, gets fired. Right? And so because of that, I think they start believing the hype. And to give you a great example of this, the Washington Post did an article this week, and it was on Donald Trump and his current situation. And he was really upset because one, he doesn't have as many Secret Service guys, right? Because he's not the president anymore. He just has a few that rotate around. Was upset about not having access to Air Force One because his 747 is from the 80s and it needed a ton of repairs. It took years to repair it. And then he was getting upset about he would try, the press wasn't covering his rallies anymore, really. And then he got upset because he called a press briefing and didn't realize nobody'd show up because he's not the president. Nobody cares what he has to say, right? So what his staff did was they called all these people and they kind of begged all these local reporters to show. So they got a couple local reporters to show up and pretend like they were doing a story when really they were there reporting on something else. And he's got a guy that follows him around on the golf course now when he goes golfing and reads him stories that are about him that are positive stories from the newspapers. And that's what the guy does. That's a job. That's how fragile his ego is.
I am so sorry. I am not paying somebody to follow me around and tell me nice things about myself. Quite frankly, the idea of somebody following me around telling me nice things about myself kind of gives me heart palpitations. I'm not gonna lie.
But see,
and I like myself. I think I'm pretty great, but I do not need someone following me around and doing that. I think it's creepy.
No, because you don't need the reaffirmation every 30 seconds, right? So, but that's the problem is.
No, but good grief.
But that's the problem is these guys, they need sycophants around them, tell him how great they are. In fact, his advisor, he doesn't have a permanent advisor. He has a few advisors that kind of fly in and out, which is really sad because you know what that means? That means the advisors are calling each other going, okay, whose turn is it to go kiss his ass? I'll do it for 1 week and then you're up.
You go.
Yeah.
You go. No, my Christmas present is I'm not going this week.
No, it reminds me of these guys always. I can't remember the name of the movie. It was from the 50s. It was an old movie, but it was a woman who was a famous actress and she hadn't been famous in like 20 years. But her butler would write her these fan letters and give them to her and read them to her to make her seem like she was still famous and popular. And he'd make up stories about her in the newspaper that weren't there. Right? And read them to her. And so she thought she was famous. And then he'd throw these parties where he'd invite people over. And the people she'd come down the stairs and they'd all applaud, right? And kiss her ass and tell her how wonderful she was. And then when she'd go upstairs to bed, they'd all applaud. And then as they're leaving, the butler's giving them money. Because he's just paid these people to show up and kiss her ass just because she needs it. And that's how she lives her life. She thinks she's still famous and relevant, and she's not. And that's kind of what happens with Trump. Is like they have the guests at Mar-a-Lago, and the members are required to applaud him when he enters and leaves the room. It's that sad of a state. So he'll come down to dinner just to get applauded, and then get up and leave just to get applauded. I mean, that's just how it goes. So
super weird.
I know it's sick, isn't it? Anyway, so the other thing about him, which is fun, was his tax information got released just, I think, yesterday, to the extent it did, right? And we don't know a ton about it yet, but we do know this. If you paid taxes in 2020, you paid more than Donald Trump did. And this is now freaking out the Republicans. So I've got a clip to dive in here on the Majority Report. And this is just from today. So we're riding their coattails as usual with them. But they're going to talk about this. They're talking about it right now.
As to what's going to happen if you release Donald Trump's tax cut.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's teeing this up. This is the Republicans are upset and they don't want to release his tax returns, and this is the guy making the argument for the Republicans.
Tax returns.
Going forward, the majority chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee will have nearly unlimited power to target and make public the tax returns of private citizens. And not just private citizens, political enemies, business business and labor leaders, or even the returns of Supreme Court justices themselves. No party in Congress should have that power. No individuals in Congress should have that power. It's a power to embarrass, to harass, or destroy Americans through disclosure of their tax returns.
Oh, I'm feeling faint. I'm feeling faint. Oh, God.
Yeah, I'm with her on that one. Who cares? They're public figures. You know? If we were ever famous and they said we don't want your tax returns, I'd be like, I don't care. There's nothing in my tax returns that's interesting.
I've often thought I could do a really great job holding some sort of public office, and then I stop and I think, man, the kinds of stuff they would be looking to scratch up on me and weird stuff I did, said or sang some night when I was out.
Oh, but that's.
I mean, not that couldn't happen anyway, but I just need to not be that interesting.
Yeah, but that's what it's going to be. So anyway,
my point is that that's what's going to happen if you're running for public office, and if you're whatever, then people are going to be putting all sorts of your stuff out there. It's
Well, that's fine, but the thing that I think is so funny about that they're kind of harping on, which is they're upset. The Republicans are upset that these things will become public, right? And since you're talking also about the first president in God knows how long who didn't release his tax returns, Obama did, Bush did, Clinton did, Bush Sr. did, Reagan did. You keep going back, Carter. I think it should be.
Just do it.
Yeah, well, I think it should just be required for public office. We should know. We should know who we're voting for, and if you're doing criminal stuff. Right, I think that's.
Well, they should know that you literally are paying your taxes.
Yes.
Even down to the super simple.
But
you're not doing anything criminal. You actually are paying your taxes. You're on the up and up with stuff in general.
But even then, there's a problem with the tax system where why is it that billionaires pay less in taxes than everybody else? All right. And that's going to tee us into our discussion today on capitalism versus socialism and why it becomes relevant in the financial world. Because what they're really upset about isn't socialism. They're worried about higher wages and taxes because it means rich people have to pay more to get the same shit. So let's start with Dave Ramsey. And he's got a caller, and she's upset about socialism, and her children have turned into socialists.
Listen, Bangor, Maine. Hi, Monique. How are you?
Very well. Thank you to Kelly for taking my call today.
Sure. If you got by her, your life's good. What's up?
That's a good move, Monique.
So I am looking for some guidance from Dave and Dr. Delaney about my will. I have two daughters, one of whom is doing very well financially. She and her husband are in the 1%. And the other daughter earns about $50,000. And for several years, I felt uncomfortable about how to divide up the assets. I'm an everyday millionaire. But more recently, I've gotten to the point where I don't want to give either of them any money.
Why?
I feel like I've worked so hard my whole life. I paid for college for them. I've paid over $500,000 for college for them. And they've turned into socialists. And they just,
Okay, stop.
but they have.
All right.
All right. I'm just going to take a moment. I know this is not any sort of an official cage match here, but
right.
I want to give my ringside commentary because I can dollar to donuts tell you what they're going to say to this. And Duncan did not share this clip with me ahead of time.
No, Lacey hasn't seen this, so.
No, I didn't know what you were going to pull up, but I can tell you what's about to happen here. So, my prediction. What's about to happen here is Dave is basically going to tell her that he's going to green light her on cutting her kids out of the will.
Mm-hmm.
And then he likes to tell other people, he might even give some sort of an anecdote about heroin addicts or I don't know, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe junk about people doing harm and harm to themselves or harm. I don't know. He likes to do stuff like that. If you're not living your life the way that I think you should live your life, and then he tries to liken living your life the way I think you should be living it to, giving money to people to do heroin or something. He likes to do stuff like that. So he might go down some weird road.
Mm-hmm.
I think. But he's definitely going to green light her on not giving the money to the kids.
Okay, so let's do it. All right, so don't give the money to the kids, because the fact that your kids have different political views is just like them using heroin. It's kind of the general argument.
He might not literally say heroin, but he kind of goes down some weird roads like that. So I'm feeling like we could go some sort of
let's watch and see. Let's see what happens.
Direction.
See what happens. But that's what we're going.
Now let's see. Yeah.
You're still in the wrong college.
Yeah.
Monique, you're my favorite call, maybe in 2 months.
I know we're all laughing.
No, we're with you. We're with you.
I'm depressed. I'm very depressed about where I see my children heading, and I think I don't want my money to go to them, and I feel terrible about that.
You shouldn't. They're not entitled. They didn't hit the DNA lottery. They're not entitled. My children have been instructed since they were small that in order to get the opportunity to manage the money that God gave me to manage, meaning that I hand off the responsibility to manage some of the Ramsey fortune to them, they will have to be people of character. Socialists are not people of character.
Okay.
They're parasites. And so.
Okay, well, you're 1 for 1. He didn't say no.
I mean, the word heroin hasn't happened at this point, but
No.
we could pretty much put that in the win column for me, right?
No, yeah,
people of character. He went down kind of my road.
I'll put it in the win column.
Yeah.
I will also tell you he does say heroin.
Really?
Yeah, you called it. He does say it in a minute. We'll play it. I'm going to play it.
Yes.
You-
Play. We got to make it as far as the heroin.
We will.
Thing, because
We will, but yeah.
I called it that's a double win. I feel like I should get bonus points if I can nail down
Right.
some version of this weird anecdote.
Oh, yeah. But the idea that we hate socialists, but it's such a weird thing. Why is the question? What is wrong with, they just have a different political view. This is more of an economic view, right? I don't hate libertarians. I just don't agree with them. Right? I don't hate conservatives. I don't agree with them. Some conservatives
Right.
I think are repugnant because they're pro-racism and things like that are just obviously repugnant things. Classism. Dave, I would say, is probably one of those guys. He might debate it, but it doesn't. His positions are pretty clear that he believes certain people deserve more than others. But we're going to get into this, so we'll get into him finishing this out real quick.
So if my children are going to be parasites, I'm not going to finance their life so that they have a reality show.
Is there a way to put money in, let's say, a trust where they couldn't get access to it till they were, let's say, 70 years old?
Well, then they just be a 70-year-old socialist, right?
Yeah, well, but I'm hoping by then they will have kind of woken up.
You can. All of our estate is trust-based, and our trust is, we've done it from a faith perspective, not an economics perspective. But if they're not walking with God, they don't get to manage God's money. That's what the trust says.
Really?
Yep. In no uncertain terms. And so, in your case, you could change that lingo and just go, when you become a capitalist, you get the opportunity to manage this money.
Monique, here's what I would do. I would take some time to distill down beyond the monikers and the
Report
labels.
on Atlas Shrugged.
What? Yeah, that's fantastic. Man, I am not usually at a loss of words, and you got me on that one. Monique, here's what I want you to do. I want you to distill down beneath the quote-unquote word socialist. Okay? What are the things that they are saying that concerns you, that you think that you are leaning into? And I want you to have a direct, straight conversation about what these things are. And then I want you to identify them. And like Dave said, it's your money. You can do what you want to with it. I've seen more and more over the last 4 or 5 years a lot of semantic shell games. And when you sit down and talk to somebody, it's like, oh, we're way on the same page. I just thought this about that, right?
I think you can say that you are not required morally, ethically, legally, spiritually to leave your money to people that you do not agree with how they live their lives.
Period, full stop.
In there. right? So now, once you've said that, then you can start to have some discussions with them that are very gentle and very life-giving and very
direct,
and very kind and very clear. And it's like, okay, I paid for all this stuff for you, and truthfully, I don't agree with the way you're living your life, and I'm not willing to finance that going forward.
Right.
And so it's up to you if you want to do that. I'm not being controlling. I just want to let you know that I'm going to go ahead and do a reading of the will, and you're not going to be in it as long as you're living this way, whatever this way is. If your kid's a heroin addict.
See, told you. He compared socialists to heroin addicts. I would say this is if your kid's a heroin addict, that's
Say 2 thumbs up for heroin addict.
Yeah. Well, that's a addiction's a disease. It's not. I don't know that I make an ethical judgment on a person with an addiction problem. Here's the deal. Let's talk about, just from a financial perspective, trusts. Okay, so a trust is a legal document. Okay, that wraps around an account. So there's living trusts and there's irrevocable trusts. A living trust would be like, I set up a trust. I'm going to leave Lacey some money because she's my kid, right? And so I'm going to set up the trust, and the trust is going to have, I can put certain specifications on it, saying you only get X amount at such and such time, right? Because I don't want to give it to you all at once, or I want to give it to you over several years. I can do things like, I could say, if you're not, like Dave said, you're not the same religion I am, you don't get to touch any of the money. Or if you're not the same political persuasion I want you to be, you can't touch the money. And then the trustee, the person who runs the account that you pay, won't distribute the money to them unless they can sort of prove that in whatever way you have to prove it, right? But the simple thing about that is okay, you need to prove that you're not a socialist. Well, how do I do that without you asking me for something illegal, like my voting record or something? And then how do I show you that, right? To prove it, right? So if you say, well, you have to vote a certain way, well, that's not legal. You can't tell people how to vote or bribe or blackmail people how to vote. That's not legal. So it wouldn't be a legal trust.
Or do they just have to register a certain way? But then that wouldn't prove how they're actually voting.
No. So that's the thing, is if it says, well, you need to be a registered Republican, then I would tell the client, register as a Republican. Then then vote however you want. And then when you get all the money, you could just register as whatever you want. Independent, Democrat, whatever. If it's one of those things where it's like, I can't touch the money unless I'm a Christian, it's like, then say you're a Christian, go to church once a week for a month. Once you get all the money in your account, do whatever you want. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, if I was living in Saudi Arabia, you better believe I pretend to be a Muslim because I know what happens to atheists in those countries. And it's not good. So, you can lie. If you have to stay alive, I would. So, anyway, she can set up a trust, do it if she wants. But, she has to pay to do all that. And even then, it's not necessarily going to accomplish what she wants. So, trusts are usually better if you have a specific, like, if I die and my kid is really young, I don't want to give them all the money at once and then blow it, kind of thing. Or it might be they need to meet with a financial planner, right, and do certain things. Or they might need to, I require them to be at least employed. Even if they're just working at McDonald's, they just need to have a job. Kind of shit like that is usually what you put in a trust. So it's, if you do have a kid who is an addict or something like that, you could require that they show that they're clean or that they be in treatment before you disperse the money, because you don't want them spending it on drugs. Things like that happen all the time. But my kid has a different viewpoint of the world than me is kind of weak. Oh no, my kid has the will of their own. They're not getting any of my money. I mean, that's basically the argument.
That being said, I am on the team of it's your money and you get to do whatever you want with it, regardless of whether it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs or not. If you want to, have whoever spend it all on your dog or something is super weird to me, but I mean, it's your money. Do what you want.
No,
if you don't want to leave it to your kids because your kids, your kid's viewpoint is different from yours, then I think that's kind of sad, but
I think it's just it's a tacky reason. Plus, I mean, that she's a Christian, it's like, okay, in the Bible, it has pretty specific wording about people who don't use their wealth to help out their family and what God thinks of those people. So, and it's not good. So, I just think it's interesting. But no, I think it's a tacky reason. But yeah, I could see where, like, look, I don't want to leave my kids all my money because I don't want them to be spoiled. I want them to do their own thing and have their own life and make their own money and not just be living in my shadow. That would be something, right? And I've seen people do that. But, you know, it just depends. I mean, I know a lot of wealthy guys where their thoughts are, well, look, I want my kid to have their own career and do their own thing. I don't want them to just coattail off me for their whole lives, right? I could sort of see that too. So there's lots of different ways we can spin that. Yeah, sorry everybody for the little blip there, but yeah. So socialism, capitalism. Okay, so I'm going to give you the real quick 5-minute bullet points. We're not going into.
It was the down and dirty.
We're not. Yeah, we're not doing the full lecture here. So prior to the Enlightenment, go ahead.
You gotta pay big bucks for that.
Yeah, you do.
That's a whole college course.
So prior to the Enlightenment, most people lived their lives as servants, serfs, peasants, right? Oh, see, you're laughing. And the way it worked was, you know, there was a king or queen or bishop or whatever, right? Shogun. And they owned everything. The lords and the ladies owned everything, even you and your family, right? You didn't own the land. You didn't own any of the products on the land, anything, right? And that's how people lived their lives. So if they wanted to come in and kidnap your daughter and take all your food as tax, you couldn't really do much unless you wanted to revolt, right? And that was just how most people lived their lives. Now, what happened was in the Enlightenment period, starting around the 1750s-ish, a guy named John Locke came around. There are others, but we're just going to focus on him because our Constitution is based on his works. A book he wrote called The Second Treatise of Government. And John Locke proposed two ideas that were kind of revolutionary at the time. One was liberalism, right? And the idea of liberalism is, well, technically, everybody would be equal under the law. So the law would apply to the king and the queen and to the peasant, right? And under liberalism, he also comes up with the idea of capitalism. And the idea of capitalism is, well, you would have private ownership of your own things. So your person, your papers, your effects, your house, you know, any land you owned, any business you owned, things like that, you would own that, right? So that was the idea that a lot of this country was founded on, and a lot of other countries were founded on. So in a capitalist system, the private business owner, the private owner, owns what's called the means of production, which is the labor, the land, all that stuff. So Lacey come work for me, and she would work and produce products. I would keep all the profit. I'd own all that, and I'd pay her a wage. Lacey wouldn't own any of her labor or the results of her labor. She'd just get paid a wage. I'd own it as the business owner, as the private owner. Okay? That's essentially capitalism in a nutshell. Along comes, about the 1850s, Karl Marx and some others, and they come up with the idea of socialism, and Marx comes up with communism. We're not going to get into communism today because there's no time. The thing about socialism is Marx is saying, well, here's the problem, is you have the business owners, right, the bourgeois that own everything, and then you have what he called the proletariat, which were the workers, the laborers, right? And so the laborers are working to produce the economy, right? The means of production. They produce the means of production. They are the means of production, but they don't own any of it. And so what happens is if you want to be a successful bourgeois, a business owner, you're trying to keep wages low as possible because it cuts into your profits, right? So you're trying to suppress that as much as possible to maximize your profits. And so these people that don't really work or do anything, they just happen to own everything, control the means of production. Well, the means of production isn't controlled by the laborers who actually produce everything, and they get poorer and poorer until what eventually happens is you have a system where it was like before, where you have a small class of people that control and own everything, and a large class of people that own nothing and are broke, and they eventually revolt, right? So with capitalism, he's saying all you've really done is replace feudalism with a system of feudalism based around money, right? So Marx's idea and a lot of these other guys with socialism and communism was, what if we redistributed the wealth so that the means of production was controlled by the proletariat, by the laborers? So in that system, yeah, we'd have the business, but Lacey would also have an ownership share in the business in a socialist system, right? Even if I created the business and hired her, she would have some ownership of the profit because it's a result of her labor, right? So if she's making me $1 million a year and I'm only paying her $10,000, I don't get to keep that $990,000 all to myself. Part of that $990,000 would have to go to Lacey as a business owner. But it would also mean she get voting share. So that's kind of what socialism ideally was to begin with. You don't really see it implemented that way today. It's still very capitalist all over the world. But what you're starting to see is countries like Japan or Sweden or Norway or, a lot of the European countries starting to implement what they're calling socialist policies. And what that is we're increasing the taxes, especially on the rich, right? Mainly on the rich, to redistribute that wealth from the top to the government, and the government redistributes it to programs to the people, like free college, free public education, universal health care, right? Housing assistance, right? And so I'll tell you a fun story. When I was in grad school, I was a guy that was there from Sweden who was an exchange student. And Sweden has a lot of those policies where they have high tax rates on the rich, but college is free, healthcare is free. You get housing assistance if you're poor. You get food assistance if you're poor. I mean, to an extent, more so to an extent than we ever have done it here in this country. And we were talking about minimum wage. And he was like, what's minimum wage? He'd never heard of it. And I said, well, the idea is to try and raise it so that people aren't working poor all the time, right? But even then, it doesn't really work. But he's like, what's working poor? But I said, those are people that work 40 plus hours a week and still make under the poverty line. And he's like, that's not a thing. I'm like, yeah, it is. For tens of millions of Americans, that's a thing. They work 60 hours a week and they still live below the poverty line. They don't make enough money to survive. And he was shocked because they don't have that in Sweden. And they don't have minimum wage in Sweden because they don't need it. Because once you have these programs in place, what they found is you don't really have poor people, and people can strive to work more and get educated and do the things they want to do, right? And then what happens is when the poor start getting raised up, they start asking for more money, and wages just go up. So the way rich people see it in this country is, well, that sucks because we're basically getting taxed on both ends, right? On one end, I'm a really wealthy guy. I have to now pay more taxes every year to pay for these programs for the poor. And now that they're not poor, they're going to want more money. So now I have to pay my workers more money, so I can't squeeze them for more profit. Right? So when they're bitching about socialism, that's what they're complaining about, is they don't want to pay higher wages and they don't want to pay their fair share in taxes. And I'll give you an example of the tax situation right here. So this is from Vox, and we're going to just do the first and last half of this real quick.
These 10 people represent everyone in America. This person on the left, she represents the poorest 10% of Americans. And on the right, he is the very richest 10%. So let's ask this group a simple question. What percentage of your income gets taxed? Most Americans pay multiple income taxes to the federal government and state governments and local governments. But a recent analysis by 2 economists added up all the income taxes. And when you do that, the data shows that poor people pay a very small part of their income to the government, and rich people pay more.
Okay, so that's true. That's absolutely true. But if you add in all the taxes that people pay, so they're starting to add in other stuff like corporate and property tax, estate tax, the big for payroll tax is a big one for most people that are in the bottom 90%, and consumption tax is the other big one. So watch how they add it
For
all
example,
together.
let's say you're looking to buy a t-shirt. When you check out, you pay a sales tax, which is a percentage of its cost. And sales taxes apply to most things. Furniture, toilet paper, laundry detergent. For some items like beer and gasoline, there are additional taxes that get incorporated into the price tag before you even get to the store. These are called consumption taxes. And we all pay the same rate on the things we buy, regardless of how rich we are. Now, you might think that since rich people usually buy more things and more expensive things, they pay a larger percentage of their income toward these taxes. But relative to how much money they have, the stuff they buy and the taxes they pay on that stuff take up a relatively small portion of their income. Meanwhile, everyone, even people with almost no money, needs to buy certain basic things to survive. And for poor people, those basic things and the taxes that come with them cost them almost everything they earn. So if we chart how much of their income each of these people pays in consumption taxes, we can see that poor people pay a much larger portion. When we put these taxes together, suddenly we see a big change. The chart shows...
So as you see in the chart, the wealthiest pay less than everybody else, right? So when they whine about socialism, what they're talking about is, what a lot of people are talking about is moving back the progressive tax system, including consumption tax and everything else, to a level where it was back to where it was in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Because back then, for the wealthiest Americans, the high marginal tax rate was over 70% for all three of those decades. And those are three of the biggest growth decades in this country. Granted, it didn't translate to black people and women, or Native American people or Hispanic people. But the idea is that we get back to that sort of system what we had before, instead of them having all these loopholes and being able to avoid tax, which is why it was funny to start with Donald Trump, who paid no tax in 2020, and the guy's allegedly a billionaire. And you have corporations that are paying less than 1% in taxes every year. And they pay low wages. Very low wages. Right? So the question is between capitalism and socialism, nobody's really advocating for full socialism right now. That's not really on the table. What they're advocating for is we need to raise tax and redistribute wealth. And that way we can alleviate poverty, which is better for the world economy and your country's economy as a whole, because you're now utilizing all of your workforce in the most positive way. That would be the argument for socialism. The argument against it would be, well, that's not fair to take this money from these rich people who earned it. But the question is, did they really earn it? Or was it just because they were rich? And part of that whole point of the tax system is to try and prevent what the founders of this country were trying to prevent, was a landed gentry, right? A royalty that ruled everything just by the graciousness of being born into wealth. So that would be the argument sort of for and against it. But you can't make that argument against socialism. So what do they typically do? They just say socialism's bad, socialists are bad, right? They never really get into what it is or what the idea behind it is. And then that way, when anything happens that they don't like economically, or somebody mentions taxes or anything, they can just scream, they're a socialist, they're evil. Just like that woman. I don't like that my kids are socialists. Well, how are they socialists? What is it that bothers you? She doesn't ever say it. I think they're evil because they're socialists. Okay. But that's not really an argument. So let's do this. Let's see if we can get that. So this is good. So this is Dave Ramsey, and he's talking to this guy, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. And I'm going to get into him in a second because he's a character, all right. But he's going to talk about why he doesn't like socialism, and listen to how poor and labored this argument was, or is, compared to what I just did.
There's an enemy. There's a war on success, particularly a war on business. All business is evil. All rich people are evil. All successful people are evil. And it's gotten and social media has hyped it up even more. And less mature voices more ridiculous voices have added to this war on success, and this idea that business executives are overpaid, they're greedy, and all of this, that the rich don't pay their fair share, and that runs contrary to a Jewish belief system.
Yes, very much so. And it's precisely that Jewish belief system that has created what you alluded to earlier as disproportionate Jewish success with money. But in as much as you also said earlier, brothers from a different mother and connection, it also lies at the heart of what Max Weber wrote about 100 years ago, which is the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. It's not an accident that that is what has created wealth in what we think of as the West. But in practical terms, what has happened in the country at the moment, certainly in this country and also in many other countries, is that there has been a collapse of an understanding of the spiritual. Now, I just want to make absolutely clear that when I say...
Okay, so the topic is socialism. Have they even talked about it yet?
No.
No, they're talking about spiritual crap that's totally unrelated. And Judaism and so I don't know that they're related. I'm gonna pause for 1 second. All right, sorry for the little blip there. So yeah, so they haven't talked about it at all. They're talking about it in religious terms. I don't know how it relates to religion, because you're talking about Judaism is what, several thousand years old. Christianity is only a couple thousand years old. I mean, capitalism hadn't been invented when those religions were founded. Socialism hadn't been invented. They were still living in basically feudal societies. What they did have was they had sort of loose republic with Rome, but that was about it. So really hadn't been any sort of real democracy or anything. So he's just spinning in circles here, and it's like they're chewing up the clock. It's the weirdest thing, especially since it's just the two of them talking. This is not like they're being grilled on CNN. So let's see where he goes.
Say spiritual, I'm speaking from the point of view of my background as a physicist, not as my background as a rabbi. So when I say spiritual, I don't mean...
Oh, by the way, he got his, his physics education, he got it at a Jewish school that wasn't... He's not really a physicist.
Or godly or anything at all. I mean, there's good spiritual. Spiritual just means things that you cannot measure in a lab. And so a violin or a saxophone are physical. I can measure their weight and how long they are. A tune is indistinguishable from...
Yeah. You know what spirituality is.
You can't...
spirituality is.
I can't measure it in a lab. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Science is the study of the natural universe. It's not... If it's outside the natural universe, then no, we can't study it because we have no... It doesn't physically exist. Right? Now, if he's talking about ideas and things like that, well, they do exist in the natural world. So it is something that can be studied. But he's going to fuck this up right here. Watch.
Noise, according to any laboratory instrument. What converts vibrating air molecules into a tune that can make you happy and make you dance or make men march off to war or bring a lump to your throat, all of that happens between our ears, in our brains, in our hearts, in our souls. And so music is spiritual, a musical instrument.
Which just goes against what he just said. Because you can measure what's going on in the brain. You can measure a person's heart rate when they listen to a tune versus a noise. You can distinguish that. There are scientific ways you can look at that, right? That person's opinion or feelings about it, that is something that we can talk about in a scientific sense because there are third-party objective views. You can measure people's chemical reactions. So what he's basically describing is saying something that isn't physical, that is actually physical. It's a physical response. So now when he's talking about spiritual, it's whatever he wants to call it. There's no real definition of spiritual here. There's no example. The example is music is spiritual. Well, does that mean a film is spiritual? Does that mean if I like the sound of running water, is that spiritual or is that a chemical or emotional response I'm having to a noise? because it's not a tune.
What does this have to do with their original thing on socialism?
Because he's going to try and do this. He's going to try and say that there's a physical component to things and a spiritual component, and that socialists don't get the physical or the spiritual component. So they have a misunderstanding of the whole system and the whole world. That's how labored this argument is. It doesn't translate, and it's entirely circular, right? Because I set up the definition that if you don't agree with the definition, then you obviously are wrong. You know,
it's all based on a definition that, quite frankly, could be argued pretty easily. I consider myself definitely to be very much a spiritual person, and I don't agree with his bizarre definition of what spirituality is. I'm not going to sit here and try to concoct one, but when I heard his definition, I was like, really?
Well, that's my point. That's my point. Is he's using it however he wants to use it. So that way, if it doesn't fit to what he wants, he can just say, you're not spiritual, you don't get it. And dismiss any discussion after that. That's how that works. And we're going to get into this guy a little bit more in a sec, but let's see if he gets to the fucking money thing, because it's just such a labored
colored paper, or
okay.
How about the orientation of
so he's talking about money now.
Iron oxide molecules on the magnetic stripe on your credit card, or zeros and ones on your financial institution's computer. What is money? And it's a really important question, because if it's physical, then it corresponds to the laws of physics. And one of the immutable laws of physics is that something can only be in one place at a time. And so this book right here is now here with me. And if I turn away a moment...
Okay, so this is stupid. So... instead of watching him labor this for another 5 minutes, I'm just going to sum it up for you real quick. And you can watch this video and disagree with me later if you want, but this is what it is. So, money is physical, right? So, in his mind, it's finite. There's only so much money, right? So, if you take money from one person, or if one person needs more money, you have to take it from somebody else. It's a zero-sum game, right? If the poor get unpoor and get richer, well, then the rich have to get poorer, when that's not necessarily true. You could still be rich. You just won't, maybe not own as rich. You may not have as much wealth in that sense, but you could be making more money, because now you have a much more productive workforce, right? So this idea that it's a zero-sum game is stupid, and I'm going to tell you why. Money is conceptual. It's not physical, all right? I wish I'd had it here today, but I have a Confederate dollar from the Confederacy, because I think it's funny. Do you know how much that Confederate dollar is worth? Zero. You know why? Because there's no Confederacy. They're gone. We beat them in the Civil War. It's over. Okay? So this is how money essentially works in a simple nutshell, so they can understand. I'm going to use my prop here. So my guy, Grogu. Okay? So Alacias, me, Grogu, we're all stuck on an island. Okay? And Lacey has a bunch of fish, and I need some fish. So I go to Lacey and go, hey, can I get 4 fish? And she's like, well, what are you going to give me? And I'm like, well, I don't have anything right now. I'll write you an IOU that I owe you 4 fish. Okay? And Lacey's like, okay, fine, I'll take it. And so I get the 4 fish. She gets the IOU, right? Well, then Lacey realizes later, oh, shoot, I need coconuts. And Grogu has a ton of coconuts. So Lacey goes to him and go, hey, can I get some coconuts? And he goes, well, what's in it for me? Lacey goes, well, I have this IOU from Duncan. Now, if it's the situation where Grogu's like, well, Duncan always pays back his IOUs on time, right? Then yeah, he'll be like, well, yeah, then that thing is basically worth 4 fish. because Duncan's never failed to pay back somebody on time. So yeah, I'll take that IOU and then I can go to Duncan and get 4 fish. Right? But if it's one of those situations where it's like, well, Duncan is kind of flaky and he doesn't always pay it back, then that IOU is not worth 4 fish. Because he doesn't know that he's going to get his 4 fish. So he might say, well, gee, Lacey, I don't think it's worth that. I'll give you I'll give you, instead of 10 coconuts, I'll give you 3 coconuts. Because that's all I think it's worth. That IOU is money. Right? The difference is when you're talking about currency from governments, the government is issuing the currency. Okay? So the government owns the money. Right? And we as the people are supposed to be represented by the government. And if you don't believe me that the government owns the money, take a piece of paper from a notebook, like I have a notepad here, right? I could take a piece of paper, I could tear it up, I could burn it. It's my piece of paper. That's totally legal. It's totally fine. If you try to do that with a dollar bill, a US dollar bill, it's illegal. It's illegal to destroy US currency. Now, they don't really enforce it, but it is illegal. Why? Because you don't own it. Now, what's the ultimate value of that currency is that A, the US government has pretty much always paid its debts on time. And it's pretty much the only government in the world that can make that claim, which is why the dollar everything's sort of hinged off the US dollar, which is part of what makes us so powerful as a country. That's why in 9/11, the main target was the World Trade Center. Because the Taliban knows where our power is. Our power is that we can set the price on the value of everything because our money is the one that everything is set against. Right? And that's all that money really is. It's a way to measure value of things in a capitalist system. And it's based on demand and supply, typically. Not necessarily need or benefit. So that's what it is at the same time, the value of money. It's a conceptual idea. But why is US money valuable? And what makes it valuable is it's the only thing you can use to pay your taxes. They won't accept anything else. I can't give them euros. I can't give them the yen. I can't go kill a deer, right, and give it to the IRS and say, hey, count this against my tax bill. No, you have to pay taxes. And you have to pay it in US currency. So to do that, all your valuable goods or sales or whatever has to be translated into US currency in order for you to remain making money and in business. So that's the ultimate value of these things. And it's backed by the taxing power of the government. So that's what the problem is. So that when they're talking about, okay, well, we want to do universal health care. And they go, well, how do you pay for it? That's how you pay for it, by raising taxes, by tax revenue. That's how you pay for things. So every time you deduct revenue from taxes, you cripple the US government because they can't bring in enough income to cover their debts. So there's a not just a political argument, but an economic argument that raising taxes would actually be better overall for the economy. It'd be better for the government as well. And it would help reduce some of the debt problem, which really isn't a huge issue. I mean, we make enough money that it's not a problem yet, but it could be at some point. So this idea that it's some sort of spiritual, thing, like it's Tinkerbell, if you just believe, right? It's conceptual, but it's conceptual because we all agree that it's worth something. If we all started going, I don't think it's worth anything, then it's not worth anything. So this idea that it's physical, tangible is a ridiculous concept. So let's see if we can get to something juicier here. What's he got here?
The wear and tear on the car. Just buy the gasoline wherever it is. She pays more money for a pair of jeans that's got a...
I'm sorry, I might have to skip this a little bit.
You create it out of nothing.
Here it is.
That's where, rather than taking... everyone's in the fixed pie, right? It's not a fixed pie.
All right, talk about one of my favorite riffs is Candles and Cakes.
Yeah, well, it's the same as musical instruments and music and tunes. And that is that money is brought into existence when one of God's children does something for another. Now, we can use the right terminology. We can call it marketing. We can call it sales.
Service.
We can call
Okay, I'm going to just skip the rest of this. Sorry, but this idea, once again, it all gets tied back to religion, right? And the other thing about money comes into existence when you provide a service. Well, it comes into existence when you provide a service and I don't have something to barter. I have an IOU that I have to give you, right? Right now, the barter system works this way. I have IOUs from the federal government, which is what a dollar bill is, which is what money is, right? The government's going to honor it and allow you to pay tax with it. That's why it's valuable. So when we're looking at it from, okay, the whole position of socialists don't get this, he's going to make an argument that socialists just take money, they don't actually make money or provide anything. But that's not true, because there are lots of countries that employ a lot of socialist things where those people work more and produce more. And they live much better lives because they don't have to worry about going broke. Right? So I also want to tell you about this guy and why he's so adamant about this. So the rabbi here is, he was born in 47, and he was born in South Africa. And that's where he lived most of his life. He was raised. Do you know what was going on in South Africa, Lacey, from the 40s to the 1991? Apartheid, maybe? So for those of you who don't know, apartheid was a system, or I mean, there are still apartheid states, but it's in South Africa. There were 4 races that they broke it down into. There was the whites, who was the smallest group. There were the Indians, the coloreds, and the blacks. And the whites owned everything and were the only ones that had voting rights and could serve in government. And the others were told what they could do for work, what they were allowed to do for education, where they were allowed to live. In fact, millions, like 3.5 million black people were literally removed from their homes, and the government confiscated their homes, and they put them in ghettos with the other blacks. And you had to work whatever serf labor you could get. So we're talking about a white guy who was part of a family that was part of apartheid, that was very supportive of it. Right? Well, what ended apartheid? People started revolting, especially in the 80s. And then apartheid, officially because the United Nations and the US and a bunch of other countries basically sanctioned and embargoed South Africa, so their economy collapsed. So what happened was the white government had to finally end apartheid in 1991. Now, a bunch of the guys who initially revolted from it, the big one being Nelson Mandela. If you haven't heard his name, he's very famous. He did, 10 years in prison, a long time in prison. And his only crime was being a political leader. Right? But he was demonized by the South African government, spent a lot of time in prison. After it was ended, he got out of prison. He ran for president in their first actual open election, real election in South African history, and he won in 94. And he was the president for a long time. Now, this guy, I'm sure, was not super thrilled about that, but I also think part of his hatred of this is, do you know what Nelson Mandela's political leaning was? He was a socialist. And they implemented socialist policies to redistribute the wealth from the rich white ruling class to all the other classes, to try and even out and make Africa more equal. So
socialism doesn't sound so good if you're in the boat of the people who had the money under the old system.
Right. It's the joke we've done before.
Really wanted to get redistributed on you, right?
Right. It's the joke we've said before is these guys are already multimillionaires. They're already rich. They're already winning the game, which is why they want to sit there and go, well, no. We don't want to change the rules and make it more fair. No. Don't keep score. Right? Because then you'll realize, wait a minute, they're winning and they didn't really do anything to win. And then you're going to start getting bitter, especially if you're not rich. And that's when people, I don't know, revolt and say, hey, wait a minute, it's just because I'm black. I can't go to school or get a job that I want. I have to work in some mine somewhere because some white guy told me to. Who's only, 5% of the population? When we're like 70 or 80? But he lived in that. And he's a rabbi now. And he's got a thing in California. He's got a bunch of nonprofits. And I think there was a scandal he was in recently where he was giving favors out. But he's also a big supporter of Israel. And Israel is listed by the United Nations as an apartheid state because they've removed Palestinians from their homes and stuffed them into ghettos and no-go zones. And he supports all that. So this is a guy who has a lifelong history of being in support of apartheid. And part of the reason he doesn't like socialism is because socialism is very anti-apartheid and classism. So it really is the enemy for him. So he's got to demonize them. But how do you demonize them? Poor people asking for food. Poor people asking for rights. Oh, well, they just, they don't get the spirituality behind it. And, it's not fair to take my money to have to pay for all this, even though I got my money because the people that came before me took all the money from them. Right? So let's not change the rules now. Right?
Oh, man.
Let's pretend history starts today. Oh, man. So that's kind of what I like about this whole thing. And I'm going to wrap it up with this one thing here real quick. With Dave Ramsey again. Because Dave Ramsey really is one of those rich guys who doesn't want to pay more tax. And he definitely doesn't want to pay his employees more. And he's definitely, like we said at the beginning, he's one of these guys that you ever see interviews with him or anything, no one ever challenges him. He surrounds himself with sycophants who suck up to him and tell him what he wants to hear, just like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all these guys. And so they have a lot of really bad ideas because no one's ever there to correct them or challenge them. And so we're going to watch him.
Well, it's certainly not. It's not a discussion happening by any means. There's not really any back and forth that happens. It's all just a series of, even when he co-hosts, I don't understand why you're co-hosting with people whose only job is to say your opinion.
Well, I'll tell you how great you are.
You don't need two people for that.
Yeah. No, but that's what they're there for. Is they're to reaffirm it, to tell him how great he is and reaffirm his opinion, because then it sounds like, if you're a listener and you're not thinking critically of it, you're sitting there going, well, Dave must be right about everything. He must be the Messiah, right? That's why they have to tie it up to religion all the time. But let's see if we can get this going. So
right.
Dave is on Fox Business, and they're talking about socialism again. And I want to do the capitalism versus socialism. But notice how they never really describe what these things are. One is good and one is bad. That's all you ever hear.
Because doing the right thing attracts customers, and doing the right thing keeps customers. Rather than doing the thing for me, I can serve in the marketplace. That's real capitalism. Capitalism is all about me, kind of an Ayn Rand kind of a thing. And selfishness, how much can I get? No rules, let me go, just plunder. That's not capitalism. That's anarchy.
Although, don't you feel like that anarchy type capitalism that you talk about is hard to achieve, because if you are running that kind of a business, someone's going to set up shop right next door to you and run it just a little bit better.
Okay, so here's that argument there. Capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism balances itself out, essentially. Okay, so if I run a business, right, and I have a product and I'm selling it and I treat my employees like crap and I develop an inferior product, right? And it's not very good, right? Their argument is, well, I'm not going to last because Alacias is going to show up and she's going to set up a business that creates a superior product and she's going to treat her workers better and drive me out of business, right? That's a fine fantasy. What usually happens is I develop a monopoly. And if Lacey tries to set up a business, I buy her out, I buy her patents, I sue her into oblivion. I run smash campaigns together. I do everything I can to stop her from creating that business. Or I set up patents that make it impossible for her. Or I tie her up in litigation. And since I have a monopoly and I have all the money already, what is she going to do? That's what happens all the time in capitalism. That's why you have so few companies that control so much. Because anybody who tries to compete with them, they just demolish. They just steamroll right over. I mean, how many different brands of phone are there? That's basically what? Sony, Samsung, and an iPhone?
Basically.
Yeah. How many different kind of real car companies are there? A lot of them are owned by the same people. You know? So it's one of those things where this is a ridiculous concept. That, oh yeah, they're just, somebody will just come in and start a better business. Well, by the time they get to that point, I mean, they haven't made enough money. I can just destroy them financially or buy them out. So this is a nonsense argument. This is like a deregulation argument of the market. If there was no regulation, it would all just work out. Yeah, sure it would. And there wouldn't be lead in the water either.
A little bit more customer-centric, a little bit more quality-centric, and you ultimately can keep a business like that running in this country.
The marketplace will purge the crooks eventually. it naturally does that.
Okay. You hear that, Lace? If you run an illegal business, the marketplace will purge you. Because nobody in the history of this country has ever...
I sort of feel like I just got like shot out like lava out of a volcano or something. I don't know. How's that work?
No, because no crook ever gets away with it in the United States because they're rich. Never happens. The market corrects. The natural market corrects and takes care of it. I mean, they don't realize that they're making the anti-capitalist argument by saying, well, see, these things never happen when they do all the time. I mean, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein got away with it. Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein got away with that for so long, not because he was rich. Get the fuck out. It's because he was rich. Because he had a lot of affluence and power. Because he had money. You know, Donald Trump gets away with stuff because he has money and affluence and power. Elon Musk gets away with stuff because, I mean, people do it all the time. Dave Ramsey gets away with illegal employment practices all the time.
The problem is, though, that the extreme socialistic type people will use someone who's a crook, and going, yay, capitalism, as an example of capitalism. And I keep trying to remind folks, that's not capitalism, that's a crook.
I'm glad you brought that up because we heard before, and I think it helped President Obama get elected. Unfeathered capitalism. They can't control themselves. The greed is too great. Exactly. Even Alan Greenspan sort of hinted at that. And that kind of was the political fodder, if you will, that got President Obama elected. And my great fear is that somehow that resurrects itself with the shaky stock market going into the election, with the shaky economy. This is the worst post-recession recovery we've ever had. And people saying simply doesn't work. We got to try something different.
Well, when the candidates continue to tell people that the way you're going to prosper is we're going to solve wealth inequality, rather than the way you solve wealth inequality is go become wealthy.
Yeah.
when the candidates keep beating that drum, then you have a segment of the population.
Okay. So there it was. So the way to solve wealth inequality is become wealthy. That's why
the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
That's why there's so many wealthy people. We broke this down last time. There are only like 400 billionaires in the United States. And they're all the people on the Forbes 400 list, right?
Mm-hmm.
And only 0.25% of them are African American. And if you were thinking Oprah, good job. You're right, it's Oprah. The rest of them are white. And most of them inherited some or all of their wealth. So this idea that you just become wealthy Well, how do you do that if you don't have an education? How do you do that if you don't have health care and you have medical problems? How do you do that when 80...
Right, it's already completely stacked against you.
Right. So his whole thing is the old Republican, we're not a country of haves and have-nots, we're a country of haves and soon-to-haves, which you know as an English teacher makes no sense logically, practically, or grammatically.
Right? No, doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. So basically what it ends up being is we don't want the taxes. We want to pay the lower taxes when we're rich. We want to have all the advantages. You should just be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And the whole selling point is the game is rigged, which is going to make it so sweet when you win. Even though you're not going to win. Because there's no solution here for how do you become wealthy. You just become wealthy. You just do it. How? You got to have money. You got to have money to start out with. So the whole thing is just a shell game. But it all comes down to this, is essentially when they scream socialism, they're not actually talking about socialism in that heightened sense. They're talking about policies that are more socialistic in their ideas. But to do that, the main one is what they're really scared of is having to pay their fair share of taxes. Because they know when they do that, wages will go up and then they'll have to pay more for their employees and they'll lose a lot of their power. Because they'll have to be contributing more back to the system. But right now they contribute less than the rest of us. So that's essentially what they're talking about. And that's the whole spiel and the whole game. You know, we can argue about capitalism, if that's better than socialism and all that jazz. If somebody wants to email us and have an argument, we'll invite somebody on and we can have that discussion. That's fine. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, is what we're really talking about when it comes to personal finance from you as an individual is if you want to be in a position where you have more opportunity, you have to take it. And the way you take it in this country is by voting. And you have to vote for stuff that's in your best interest, not in the best interest of the wealthy guy. Right? So that woman calling in, I'm an everyday millionaire, right? Which means probably half of it's in her house and some of it's in her retirement savings. And she's living off that. It's like, yeah, I'm sure she worked a long time and saved money to build that. She also, I'm guessing, is a white woman. So she had all the advantages of the color of her skin. And being, you know, in a society where black people were suppressed and Native Americans and Hispanics and Asians were suppressed for years, right? But at the same time, she's had the advantages. She's there now. And to sit there and go, well, I don't like the idea of taxes and all this stuff. I don't like the idea that my kids are saying that they support that. That's fine. But the bottom line is you're missing, how is it that you got here? The money you want to give away or don't want to give away, how did you actually get it? Right? That's where I think people miss the point. So, anyway, you have anything else you wanted to add? Or
No, I don't. That last one was really weird.
They were all weird. Well, and we got the apartheid rabbi on, so.
Right, we got the apartheid rabbi and
Yeah.
Apartheid rabbi and
We got Baby Yoda.
Dave going on, Fox. But it drives me crazy that they didn't really stop to define socialism versus capitalism at all. They didn't start off with a premise accurately, even what it was. But
No, because that's the point, just to demonize.
First, they didn't bother.
Yeah, just to demonize. Because if you describe it, people like it. That's the problem. Right. So, anyway, good show. Where can everybody find you?
All right, so for blog posts and information on courses, coaching programs, etc., you can go to mysensewithsense.com. If you want to write in for more information about those things, or if you want to argue with us, as previously suggested, or send us clips, topic suggestions, or ask questions. Duncan, how do they write to us?
Yeah, just email us. Our email's below. It's gossipfinancead@outlook.com. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and happy holidays. We hope you guys are all safe and have fun. Talk to you later.